You are told that holding a scalpel means you are a god. But the medical system is a meat grinder designed to trade your humanity for spreadsheets, leaving you with a six-figure debt and a quiet room full of faceless ghosts. Stay until the end. See what remains of you at level 10. Level 1, the pre-med student. Level 1, the pre-med student. You are 19 years old. You have told everyone you know that you are going to be a doctor, flashing an untamed ego at Thanksgiving dinner to proud grandparents and writing it in bold, naive strokes on your college application essay. Welcome to Shadow POV, where we dismantle the illusions we build for ourselves. You think that label makes you chosen, but you have never touched a living patient, never held a cold scalpel, and never stared into the sunken eyes of a dead body. If this descent into the medical machine grips your curiosity, subscribe now to join our journey through these psychological systems. Your support keeps our investigations alive. Right now, your life is organic chemistry. That is not a metaphor. Your entire existence shrinks to the ruthless geometry of carbon rings. You sit in a lecture hall with 300 other students who also swore they were destined for greatness. By December, half of them will quietly desert to business. The professor doesn't learn your name. To him, you are a mere head count, waiting to be filtered by a brutal curve set by hyper-caffeinated peers who study 14 hours a day. When you get a 68 on your first midterm, you sit in your car for 20 minutes, staring at the steering wheel, suffocated by the first taste of systemic failure. Level 2, the medical student. But the shattered ego of your first failing grade is merely a quiet prelude to the physical reality waiting for you behind the heavy, windowless doors of the medical campus. Level 2, the medical student. 4 years of academic exile stand between you and the letters MD, a clinical gauntlet designed to test how much information a human brain can hold before it cracks under the pressure. You memorize every bone, muscle, and microscopic nerve branch, tracing the magnificent architecture of the human machine while learning every terrifying way it can fail, warp, and rot. The day you walk into the gross anatomy lab, the illusion of medicine dies. A donor body lies cold on the stainless steel table, a silent teacher who gave their flesh so you could learn to heal. Your hands shake as you press a cold scalpel into human skin for the first time. The room goes dead quiet, drowned in the scent of formaldehyde and a heavy, metallic odor underneath that you will never forget. You name your cadaver, because calling them the body feels like stripping away their last shred of humanity. By the third year, you are cast into the hospital ecosystem for clinical rotations. A shadow in a short white coat holding a stethoscope you barely understand. When you are ruthlessly questioned on rounds, the silence of your ignorance hurts your chest. Then, an 84-year-old man flatlines right in front of you. The monitor screeches. The attending calls the time, and you stand there frozen, carrying a heavy, uncharted grief back home in your car. Level 3, the intern. Yet, walking away from that flat line with a heavy chest is merely the cost of entry for the true meat grinder that begins the moment you graduate. Level 3, the intern. You cross the stage, you hold the heavy diploma, and you are legally called a doctor. But the terrifying reality of the human system is that you know absolutely nothing. July 1st arrives, the exact date every new resident across the country steps onto the floor, and you are instantly hit by what veteran nurses call the July effect, a treacherous period where the learning curve turns into a vertical cliff face and mistakes carry real blood costs. You work 80 hours a week, a clinical limit enforced only on paper, while you input falsified logs just to keep the administration compliant. You survive on brutal 28-hour shifts, sleeping on a paper-thin mattress in a cramped call room that smells of collective exhaustion. When your pager screeches 15 minutes after closing your eyes, your body moves down the hallway before your brain is even conscious. You write hundreds of orders, draw blood, and present complex patients on morning rounds, desperately reciting lab values entirely from memory. When you miss a critical potassium result, a senior resident pulls you into a quiet break room and dissects your mistake with a cold, clinical sharp edge. You go home after 14 hours, eat stale cereal in the dark, and question your entire existence. Then, a single text from a patient's daughter, thanking you for your quiet kindness, breaks your shell, leaving you crying into the box before you wake up to do it all over again. Level 4, the resident. But the tears drying on your face in that quiet apartment are just a brief, vulnerable hesitation before the relentless system forces you to build an impenetrable armor. Level 4, the resident. You survived the initial shock of intern year, and the hospital has officially become your entire macro universe. The calendar pages blend into a singular, continuous shift where your value is no longer measured by effort, but by the cold execution of clinical judgment. You know which basement vending machine has the fresh snacks, which hidden bathroom remains empty, and which old school attending will ruthlessly dismantle your confidence on a whim. The safety net is shrinking. You are no longer just writing pre-approved orders. When a 52-year-old man grips his chest in the emergency bay, you read the subtle shifts in the EKG lines yourself, rapidly calculating the thin boundary between a massive myocardial infarction and an acute panic attack. You are right most of the time, but the few times you are wrong keep you profoundly humble. Now, you look at the terrified, pale faces of the new interns and see your own ghosts. You pull them into a quiet hallway, asking if they are okay, letting them break down because nobody listened to you when you wore their shoes. Meanwhile, your personal life completely disintegrates. You are a third-year resident making less per hour than the hospital parking attendant, canceling dinner plans for the third time this month, and missing your best friend's wedding because the system demands your total, unmitigated sacrifice. Level 5, the fellow. But swallowing the bitter truth of your broken personal life is a prerequisite for entering an even narrower, hyper-focused exile where your world entirely shrinks to a single organ. Level 5, the fellow. You completed residency and survived the general meat grinder, meaning you could finally escape the institution to practice independently and earn real, substantial money for the first time in your adult life. Instead, you willingly signed up for more specialized isolation, plunging into a subspecialty fellowship where you spend up to 3 years mastering a microscopic slice of the human body. You are exceptionally good at exactly one thing now. When general internal medicine teams hit a wall with a patient's bizarre, life-threatening arrhythmia, they call you the cardiology fellow because the electrical conduction system of the heart is your entire universe. You walk in, read the 12-lead EKG, instantly spot the subtle delta wave they miss, and feel a surge of true clinical competence. Yet, the system demands your intellect for its research machine. You spend your rare free hours running clinical trials, analyzing data sheets, and presenting PowerPoint slides in sterile hotel ballrooms to build an academic reputation. You are 32 years old, trapped in a rented apartment with $280, 000 in compounding debt, while your college roommate in finance has a suburban home and a solid 401k. You remind yourself you didn't choose this for the money, but some nights that feels like a lie. You whisper just to survive. Level 6, the attending physician, but gripping tightly to that fragile academic nobility, is a luxury you can no longer afford the morning you step out of the shadow of training and onto the floor as the ultimate authority. Level 6, the attending physician. The training wheels are permanently gone. The safety nets are dismantled, and the psychological weight of the entire room shifts onto your shoulders. When a patient crashes on the ward at 3:00 a.m., the panicked resident calls your cell phone because you are the final answer. There is no higher clinical entity to overrule your judgment. And if you fail, your signature goes on the death certificate. You enter a world of massive financial shifts, commanding a salary of $400, 000 a year. Yet the money quickly reveals itself as mere insulation against a deeper, cold reality. You build intimate, multi-year bonds with human beings like Mrs. Chen, who brings you homemade cookies despite her failing kidneys, or the 19-year-old girl with acute leukemia who looks at you and asks point blank if she is going to die. You tell her you will fight like hell, and you mean it. But you carry them all home in your head, replaying split-second diagnostic choices at 2:00 a.m. while staring at your bedroom ceiling. The system forces you into morbidity and mortality conferences, where colleagues sit in a cold auditorium to dissect your worst days and operational misjudgments. It doesn't feel like professional improvement. It feels like being opened up on the table yourself without anesthesia. Level 7, the chief department head, but enduring that cold dissection of your own technical choices is exactly what forces you to step away from the physical reality of the bedside and into the sterile, paper-strewn corridors of administrative power. Level 7, the department chief. You have proven your absolute clinical competence over a decade of flawless service. So the institution rewards you by handing you a heavy mahogany desk, trading your stethoscope for a spreadsheet. If you hold this rank in an elite academic hospital, you begin by overseeing the training of every single resident in the program. A thankless task where you design a master schedule and mediate bitter conflicts between bone-tired doctors who are far too exhausted to maintain basic civility. You are the fragile bridge between the detached attendings and the drowning trainees, and both sides constantly believe you are selling them out to the other. Eventually, you ascend to the top of your specific domain, the head of surgery or the director of the emergency department. Suddenly, every systemic error, every behavioral infraction, and every technical misjudgment within these walls lands directly on your desk. When a surgeon nicks a critical artery, you carry the blame. You spend your days trapped in conference rooms, defending a shrinking 12% budget cut against hospital administrators who view human healing as mere relative value units. You became a physician to preserve human life, but now you fight insurance corporate politics just to keep your operating rooms open, desperately clinging to your original purpose. Level 8, the chief medical officer, but fighting fiercely to salvage your clinical soul from those corporate spreadsheets is merely a minor skirmish compared to the total psychological transformation required when you ascend to the absolute peak of institutional command. Level 8, the chief medical officer. You take off the scrub top for the final time, put on a sterile, tailored suit, and cross the threshold into the C-suite as a corporate executive. The chief medical officer is the supreme clinical authority within these concrete walls. Every institutional protocol, every risk management policy, and every legal guideline governing how medicine is executed, runs directly through your heavy office. You report directly to the CEO and a governing board of accountants and lawyers who have never touched a dying human being. Acting as the solitary, exhausted translator between the bleeding realities of medicine and the cold language of business metrics, you oversee hundreds of physicians across every disparate department, setting the definitive standards and investigating when the system fails catastrophically. When a surgeon operates on the wrong limb, you lead the root cause inquiry. When a sudden pandemic turns your concrete parking garage into a chaotic triage bay, you are the one who drafts the execution protocols determining who receives a scarce ventilator and who is left to suffocate. You signed your name to those statistics. You carry the faceless ghost of those choices in a quiet, dark corridor of your mind that no corporate title, executive prestige, or six-figure check can ever reach. Level 9, the health system CEO, public health leader. But isolating the faceless ghosts of those triage decisions is merely a defense mechanism before you leave single buildings behind to command the macro machinery of an entire nation's healthcare network. Level 9, the health system CEO or public health leader. You have ascended past the physical walls of any individual hospital, now directly controlling an integrated medical empire of dozens of regional clinics and tens of thousands of employees who look to your boardroom for direction. Or perhaps you hold a federal appointment like the Surgeon General, weaponizing data to shape policy for millions of citizens you will never look in the eye. The moral compromises become purely institutional now. You sit at a mahogany table and choose whether to allocate millions to an elite cancer center in a pristine suburb where patients have premium insurance, or to expand an underfunded, crumbling inner city emergency room where the uninsured use the lobby as primary care. Every line you sign on a budget sheet saves one community and quietly fails another. You testify before congressional committees and smile at charity galas as wealthy donors write checks to immortalize their names on hospital wings. Yet, your 58-year-old body feels every bit of your 40-year career. Your knees ache from decades of standing on hard operating floors, and your eyes strain against endless financial reports. You realize the modern industrial complex has sanitized the human element of healing into cold spreadsheets, widening the severe gap between the elites who fund hospitals and the exhausted souls who run them at 3:00 a.m. Level 10, the legacy. But watching that system prioritize budgets over the burning souls at the bedside is the final realization that breaks your link to the machinery, leaving you with only one exit route. Level 10, the legacy. You retire. You clean out a cold executive office that accumulated 30 years of brass plaques and handwritten thank you cards from patients whose names you still carry in your marrow. You pull your heavy white coat off the back of the door and fold it for the last time, running your thumb over a faded brown stain near the pocket from a chaotic code blue decades ago that never came out in the wash. At your retirement dinner, former residents you pushed through the grinder fly in to call you a mentor, a savior, the reason they didn't quit when they were hollowed out. You didn't know you had that effect. You go home to a quiet house, sitting beside a spouse who spent decades eating dinner alone while you comforted dying families. Your daughter is now in her first year of medical school. You explicitly told her not to choose this exile, but she didn't listen. She has that exact same dangerous mix of terror and conviction burning in her eyes. You can't protect her from the bone-crushing exhaustion or the cold system that will try to turn her empathy into statistics. All you can do is tell her that the privilege of being trusted with a life at its most vulnerable moment is something that never gets ordinary. Down the hall, another code screecher. A stranger's life hangs in the balance, and the cycle continues. This entire psychological evolution dismantles a brutal truth. The systems we build to save lives often demand the systematic crushing of our own humanity. We watch an idealistic 19-year-old trade personal identity for a prestigious future title, only to be processed through a cold, unforgiving meat grinder. The clinical detachment required to make incisions into the dead and manage flatlining patients inevitably hardens into a dense, protective shell. True competence arrives, but it isolates you deep within academic micro-universes, completely disconnected from mundane social milestones. As the institutional ranks ascend, the burdens morph from physical exhaustion into severe moral trauma. Bedside compassion is traded for administrative spreadsheets, macro budget choices, and corporate liabilities. The final execution of authority forces leaders to balance clinical ethics against sterile business metrics, deciding who survives and who suffocates based entirely on resource allocation. By retirement, you realize that the massive healthcare complex actively sanitizes the human element of healing into spreadsheets. Yet, looking at the next generation, stepping into this exact meat grinder, you recognize the sacred nature of the work. The systemic hazing and absolute personal sacrifice are devastating. But the profound privilege of holding a vulnerable life remains an extraordinary anchor. The deepest lesson here is that delayed gratification can become a psychological trap if you forget to live in the present. We often sacrifice our youth, relationships, and peace for a future milestone, only to realize the summit is lonelier than the climb. To apply this today, stop treating your current phase as a mere stepping stone. Protect your empathy from being optimized by metrics, and look at the people around you before the system turns them into faceless statistics. Which level of this medical journey do you think demands the heaviest personal sacrifice? Please share your perspective in the comments below so we can discuss. And don't forget to subscribe to help Shadow POV bring you more deep systemic breakdowns.